and so yes, just like Richard said, I'm going to be talking about entrainment, communication, and emotions. This is basically I'm just kind of going to give you a brief introduction to who I am and what kind of work I've been doing, and then I'll show in more detail two specific studies. So one is looking at a mirror game, body movement mirroring in a live situation, and then the other is a project called Social Emotions, which we carried out here a couple of years ago. And the first one does not have any music to it, as of yet at least, and the second one does have. But recently I've been focusing more on dance and body movement, so that's a little bit like as a background there. So for where I come from, I'm currently at Aalto University. This is our beautiful campus right next to Helsinki, and we are at the Department of Neuroscience and Biomedical Engineering. Previously I've been in the University of Jyväskylä Music Department, working with Petri Toiviainen and his wonderful crew of researchers. And before that I did my PhD in Cambridge with Ian Cross, so that's my kind of, I have a background in musicology, basically music psychology and those kinds of things. Now currently why am I here in the neuroscience department? Basically because our department is quite interested in social neuroscience specifically, and there are lots of attempts here to try to expand the practice of neuroscience to capture people in real naturalistic interactions. So this kind of social neuroscience, we want to study that also by trying to measure multiple people at the same time. So these are two-person recordings, either EEG or MEG, which we can do, or then we also had a project on trying to squeeze two people into the same fMRI scanner, which we managed to get working technically, but then priorities shifted to other projects. So currently, in terms of neuroscience, we have in Aalto quite a nice set of equipment that we can use. And then from this slide, there's missing quite a lot of the kind of behavioral equipment, which is what I spend most of my time with. So we have a optical motion capture system, and then a host of other behavioral measurement tools, including eye trackers and other such nice toys that are helping me in my project. If you have any questions, of course we have question time after my talk, but if there are some, let's say, more kind of substantial or something comes to your mind later, then I can be reached via this email. And don't hesitate to contact me. I'll be very happy to kind of answer or help you out if you have any think that I can help you out in any way. Okay, so now to the main content of my talk. So I think the work I've been doing recent years basically all kind of boils down to this kind of statement. So I want to learn how the human mind works, and so to do that, I'm trying to study the human mind in its kind of natural habitat, so to speak. So that means basically that I want to see how it works when the mind is engaged in interaction with other minds, when it's doing its live work, what it's basically evolved for. And I've been looking at it in or studying or using multiple different contexts or paradigms, and also different domains, if you will. So I've been looking at music, I've been looking at dance, I've been looking at movement improvisation. We even did a study or a couple of studies on conversations. The common denominator of all of these, one way of kind of shared description that kind of fits to all of these, is that they are improvised interactions. So this improvisation part, to me, is quite important at the moment. So what this means is that these are, of course, they are live interactions. So this is the human mind doing basically what it evolved. It has evolved to do. So interact with other minds. The improvisation part here is that we try to keep, or I'm mainly interested in interactions that are somehow open-ended or somewhat open-ended. So when we set these interactions in motion, we don't already know 100% what the outcome will be. So there is some dynamic that can take the interaction to one place or another. And this, of course, means that from an experimental perspective, some of them can be very, let's say, difficult from let's say, traditional scientific experimental science, experimental psychology perspective. So one thing that I've learned in recent years is that the importance of combining different methodologies and different approaches. So it's very difficult to pin down what's going on and to kind of capture what's interesting in these interactions by using, let's say, only qualitative methods or only relying on, let's say, motion capture or only relying on MEG recordings. Rather, it's quite important to have multiple points of view, multiple takes, including qualitative work and qualitative analysis, and of course, quite often the perspective, like the first person perspective of those who are interacting is as precious as gold. So having a report from people who are actually doing these interactions is important, and how to get how to get participants, how to get them to explicate what was going on is a big challenge. And I don't have a response, or I don't have a kind of a recipe on how to really properly do that. It's just like basically one of the goals recently that's arisen, that this is something, how to capture the experience of participants of these improvised interactions. It seems to be kind of, to me personally, it kind of becomes more and more important the more I do this work. And it's a very non-trivial issue, because the participants themselves are not aware of what everything that's going on. There's very interesting work done in jazz improvisation by Neta Spiro and Michael Schober, where they show that the participants in the improvisation, they had improvisation duets. They show that the participants in the improvisation did not necessarily have any kind of advantage over an outsider observer about what's going on in the improvisation. So they have their own subjective view, which is important and which we need to value, but their privileged perspective, having been one partner in that interaction, is not necessarily let's say the correct answer of what's going on, because the two participants very often disagree with each other about what was going on, who was suggesting ideas, musical ideas, and how they decided to play what they played, and the participants would often agree more with an outsider observer than they would agree with each other. So that's a very nice piece of work showing how complicated this issue is. Anyway, that's somewhat a side point, but just kind of want to say that I'm quite aware of the and aware of the limitations of even all the methods and all the approaches that I'm going to present now in capturing everything that's going on in these improvised interactions, and the aim often is not to capture everything. It's to capture something that we can talk about. Okay, so just as a recap, why live interaction? So why is it so important that this interaction is live and dynamic, and why can't it be a more traditional experiment? Why can it not be that I have an individual participant that interacts with, let's say, a computerized, let's say an AI or some kind of a controlled computer agent that I could perfectly control and then have the same conditions for all participants. Well, comes from the background that this is the condition. The live interaction is the condition that is more naturalistic than the traditional psychological approach of isolated individuals being tested. And there is a lot of recent literature, and with recent I could maybe talk about even the last 40-50 years, but definitely in the last 20 years quite a lot of very good theoretical work done and practical work also done on extended cognition, so embodied or enactive cognition, that kind of suggests as well that we need to be more open than what we can be in the lab, so to speak. And here the improvised part, this open-endedness, is important, because both in the social interaction and both in this open-ended, they both bring in phenomena that otherwise we wouldn't even have in these individual situations. So there's this live response and this mutual adaptation that we have when we are interacting in a live situation. This is something that for instance would not be seen at all. In terms of let's say like a philosophical mission statement, I really like what Ezequiel de Paulo and Hanne de Jager have been writing about participatory sense making. It's a really, for instance, the 2007 paper is a very good summary of kind of what the inactive cognition is as an approach and why it's important and interesting. Okay, so then going to data and going to something that we've been studying. So as a background, I'm going to be presenting stuff from two projects that we've run. The first one that I start with is a project that is still ongoing or currently ongoing, and this is a collaboration that is being run in Paris. So this is a collaboration between dancers, dance teachers, movement improvisers, cognitive and neuroscientists, and philosophers, and it's a project called ICI. And I think I could edit this quickly to give you a link. Sorry, I forgot to add this link. But luckily we can kind of quickly fix it. So if you want to check it out, that's where we reside in terms of the internet. It's a project. The ICI is coming. ICI comes from the French. It's an acronym from the French title, de l'improvisation conjointe à l'interaction. So from joint improvisation to interaction. And this is a project where we try to develop ways of looking at different group processes with a team that is a multidisciplinary team that consists of, as I mentioned, artists and scientists, if we want to give this kind of broad labels to people. And this is specifically we are trying to, we are using movement improvisation and movement improvisation practices to get into these phenomena. And movement improvisation, especially contact improvisation, which is one of the strong backgrounds in that project, they are quite good and well suited for this kind of a, let's say, group psychological experimentation, because as a practice it's not something that it's not an artistic practice where you spend 2 years in a studio rehearsing something and then you go on stage and do that. It's not something that's based on work of art that you prepare, but rather it's a let's say it's a lifelong process of learning about who you are and how you move, and what does that movement mean, and how do you interact with it, with others, and what influences those interactions. So basically, contact improvisation or movement improvisation asks more or less these same questions. How does the mind work? How does it work in social interaction? How are we influencing each other, and how do we perceive things around us? And therefore, much of what happens in movement improvisation of this type is that whoever is running, what we can call it a dance teacher, who is running these kinds of workshops, for instance, they often have a theme, and in getting the group to do things, they, as a group, basically then explore and research these phenomena. So they, in our project as well, we have been all practicing this art. All the researchers have been kind of dancing and moving as part of the project, and we've been through movement been exploring processes such as communication, emotional contagion, dividing our attention to what others are doing, what we are doing ourselves, and directing our attention in different kinds of ways, tuning into other people, trying to, while being eyes closed or blindfolded, trying to perceive what's going on outside of ourselves or what the others are doing, trying to connect and synchronize with other people, while not seeing them, while not hearing them, etc. So the practice itself is kind of partly, and I would say even largely, it's about exploration and research on topics that are very central to cognitive science and to psychology. So that gives us a good starting point for the project. And in the project, we are taking these improvisation practices, these protocols, these scripts, and then developing them with a view of using them as a research kind of research platform, and using all kinds of measurement tools that we can imagine, from EEG to accelerometers to videos to personal reports to interviews, all kinds of rating questionnaires and stuff. We then try to kind of figure out how these processes work, basically. So this is a very, very fundamental marriage between artistic and scientific approach that we are kind of working together already from before we even have research questions. So everything is done together to ensure that we have like a balanced and equal relationship in this sense. And this is something that's very, I find that is very important, that since we quite often have the same aims in trying to understand how, let's say, attention works, how joint attention works, or how we perceive each other, or what is togetherness and how does that work. It's quite important that we don't then say that, okay, we are both interested in the same thing, that's good, let's start working, and then the researchers go and design a protocol, and then kind of squeeze the artistic practice into a box that can be, nicely done in a laboratory, and it can be measured and it can be controlled and blah 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 blah. And then in a process they probably end up simplifying, they end up like controlling these and these variables and randomizing these and those variables, and in the end the actual art, the actual interaction is then dead. So this is something we want to avoid. We want to keep the phenomenon themselves as live and as possible, and kind of make sure that the well-being of the actual phenomenon is not compromised in the process. So of course we simplify, of course we focus, and of course we control extraneous variables as much as we can, but we walk through this process with the artists, so that they'll keep us scientists on the straight and narrow in terms of not controlling, not kind of doing too much violence to the phenomenon itself. And at the same time, what we do, our measurements, our analysis, and all the knowledge that we have and all the experience that we have in designing experiments and in analyzing, seeing situations and seeing interactions and being able to analyze and pick them apart is very helpful for the artistic side of the project, improving their ability to do their dance teacher work. There improves their way of introducing these phenomena and these kind of scripts and protocols to people, and helps their day-to-day work through that. Okay, so let's go to the first thing that we did, and this is data which predates the EC project a little bit, but it gives me a good platform to talk about it. So here's the mirror game. So I'll play the video, and you can watch two people play this game, and I'll explain it a little bit. I'll probably kill something from my other computer because it's going on too hot. Okay, so this is originally from a warm-up exercise from improvisation theaters. So one person is the person who moves, and the other person is their mirror. And typically what's going on here and how this is done is that people are taking turns. So we have two people standing facing each other. First, I'm the mover, so I do whatever, like I comb my hair and do a little bit of whatever movement I do. And you, being my partner, your task is to mirror me, be like my bathroom mirror or whatever. And then after a while we swap roles, so you do your movements and I mirror. And then in the third stage we lose this role division. So instead of having a clear leader and a follower, we have a joint leadership condition. So we try to dissolve these roles of leaders and followers and try to kind of co-create movement we try to get into this mood or this kind of sensation of movement just emerging without there being a designated leader. This has been taken into experimental psychology in a simplified version. So this is from Lior Noy and his colleagues from Israel who did a study where they simplified this into one dimension. So they had a box on a table that had two slits and two buttons, and the buttons were moving in the slits. And I was moving this button, and my partner would move their button, and our task would be to be as synchronous as possible in moving the buttons from left to right. So very, very simplified, but because the button positions could be measured through the device that they set up, they could quantify perfectly what's going on in the interaction, and they could then model the interaction and figure out what kinds of movement parameters, kinematic parameters are involved. We extended this a little bit, so they did a 1D version, we did what basically is a 2D version, even though this is done in a 3 dimensions, but because people are then now, instead of full body movement, they are just moving their fingers and their hands, and they are instructed to extend their arm and index finger and to follow the fingertip of the other person. And again, we do those 3 conditions. So the blue is leading, then the red is leading, and then they are jointly leading in the end. And from this, from this we then do a number of analyses, mainly following from what Noy et al. Were doing in their 2011 paper. So when we take the kinematics of the movement, so we take the accelerations of their hand and just ignore the 3 dimensions, just take the norm of the acceleration, so the magnitude of the acceleration, and then we cross-correlate those. For this 1 minute period, we get this picture. So if we have the condition where A is leading, so the blue one is leading, we get this blue curve showing that the cross-correlation showing that the person who is leading is actually leading in the acceleration profile by about 0.1 of a second. So that's as expected. If we flip the roles so that B is now leading, we are getting exactly the mirror image of this process of this profile. So now B is ahead by 0.1 of a second. So the interesting question, of course, is what happens if we do the joint leadership condition, and it's the black line here. So we have basically both leading at the same time with the similar lag. So the lag structure in a sense isn't changed, but now it shows on both sides of the cross correlation. So they are, in this perspective, looking at the lag of their movement, we can say that they are both following each other. So that's our interpretation of this. So now one question that you can ask here is that is it just how do they share the leadership? Is it do we get this emergent movement, or is it just taking turns in leading? So is it one participant is leading first, and then when they get tired, the other one takes over and then they lead? And this is not a clear-cut case. We don't have like a full 100% answer to this because it depends on the pair a little bit. However, we can try to answer this by taking the same cross-correlation and kind of looking at it over time and how it evolves over time. So here now the lag is on the vertical axis and time is now on the horizontal, and the magnitude of the correlation is in color. So the brighter colors indicate higher correlation. So those basically those peaks. So we see that both of those two peaks more or less kind of occur all through this 1 minute of movement. So in this case, I think mostly the answer is that they are kind of following all the time. So this is an index or kind of this indicates mutual adaptation. Continuous mutual adaptation here, rather than having a very clear turn-taking of leadership. There are moments, of course, when the leadership is not that clear. There are moments where it looks like that the leadership is kind of shifting from one side to another. So it's not a clear-cut yes/no answer. However, then if we take some other measurements, so not the acceleration, not the correlation of those, but look at the quality of movement. Okay, this is quantitative, but look at what kind of movement they are making, and especially we are interested after Lionoy and in their paper they indicated that whoever is leading is able to produce a very smooth movement. That this is understandable because they know where they are going, so they can do a very smooth movement without any hesitation, without any jitter. However, the person who's following is often kind of overshooting or undershooting, or they are late or a little bit early, and they have to do all kinds of corrective measures to stay up with the leader or keep up with the leader. And so Noy et al. Indicated that if you have a lot of this kind of fast, high frequency, 2 to 3 hertz especially, 2 to 3 hertz movement or jitter in the movement profile, then that indicates that you are following. And what they showed is that people, when they are doing this shared leadership, they get lower jitter than what they get when they are following. And we replicated this result. So this is an indication from this is data from a leader-follower condition. So whoever is leading is getting, if we are just looking at filtering the movement data and kind of looking at how much energy there is in the 2 to 3 hertz range, we see that for the leader it's much lower than the follower. So where are we in the joint leadership condition? Here's just a kind of a sum across our 16 pair data. So the joint leadership condition is the smoothest. It's the one where people are the most kind of the least jittery overall. The difference between the leading and joint leadership is not significant, but the following and joint leadership, which is the interesting question here, is very significant. So in a sense, this mirror game and its two-person variant is a good, to us it's an interesting paradigm. It's an interesting experiment because it allows us to look at movement. It allows us to look at synchronization, so to speak, or entrainment without it being a rhythmic task, and that in itself kind of distinguishes it from the 130 years of finger tapping studies that have been done, and to which I contributed myself as well previously. So it's kind of a novel paradigm. It's slightly more open. It's more free. It's more fun, and it kind of gives us this tool to look at this. For instance, these kinds of social roles. So if you have this leading and follower roles assigned, or you don't have them assigned, and we can see interesting things there. And just being able to kind of characterize that this kind of shared emergent leadership, which we, by the way, often see in musical ensembles. This is basically, even though you have this kind of links back, if we look at musical contexts where similar stuff has been done. There's Ivana Konvalinka's tapping study showing more or less similar correlation or cross-correlation patterns. There's interesting studies with Caroline Palmer and Werner Goebbels showing that even this kind of a mutual adaptation, which is kind of this two-peak profile in the cross-correlations, we get this even though we have like in a piano duet where we have a discant and a bass, the leader and the follower. Even in that condition, we have this kind of mutual adaptation that both participants are in fact influenced by the other, regardless of what the role designation is. So my argument would be that in this kind of musical ensemble, we actually even though in an ensemble there's a leader, even though in the musical notation there is a melody and others are accompaniment, there is this kind of what characterizes a good musical performance, musical ensemble performance, is this kind of joint leadership, which comes from the musicians being able to play their parts well enough so that they can really listen to each other and kind of gel together and kind of be influenced by each other. So in that sense, kind of the interaction part of a musical ensemble performance has this kind of a taste of improvisation to it, because it has this open-endedness where no two performances are exactly alike. There is freedom to influence, and good performers, of course, are able to do this so that every performance is tasty and interesting in a novel way, even though they are very highly rehearsed. So this is in a way the mirror game, even in this really here this is like a lab experiment using motion capture, and as such a very limited, narrow approach, basically a starting point. Still a very kind of impoverished version of what is done in improvisation and improvisational theater, is giving us quite interesting basic background. So currently we are running a study with people in Jyväskylä University where we are looking at this two-person mirror game and how it indexes intersubjectivity. So we are correlating behavior and performance in this game with other empathy measures and intersubjectivity measures and other kind of collaborative measures, and how performing here and having what kinds of feelings you have towards the other person, how they are linked and correlated. So this is one direction that we are taking. The other direction that we are taking is basically extending this. So one extension that we have been working on and collected some data from is to extend this from 2 to 4 people, which makes it a little bit more messy and as such a little bit more interesting. So here, if you have 4 people in a circle, now it's as long as you move up and down, you are still kind of in the well-defined area. So you can still perfectly have 4 people mirroring each other, moving up and down. But the moment you start moving laterally, you have to start making decisions of whether you are actually mimicking the movement, so you're doing the same movement as the other person, or whether you are mirroring it, so you are doing kind of the opposite. And then with 4 people, you also have to have much more dynamic in this kind of who is leading, who is following, which one of the 3, if they are suggesting slightly different movements, which ones should I follow? And so that gives us kind of flags this kind of 4-person game as very interesting in kind of an interesting measurement tool for all kinds of group dynamic situations, but it also being able to measure and understand what's going on kinematically here gives us a way into, let's say, expanding this even more. So not necessarily to more participants, but to more freer movements. So here we are still playing with, like, this video is coming from a trial where we are still asking people to mainly move their hands and basically follow each other's fingers. However, we can then to make this closer to what improvisation is about, to make it more of an open-ended game, we can start with this and then open it up so that it's not just following the finger, it's following the whole body, it's following moving around in space and all kinds of other things. However, once we have our measures, once we have our ways of capturing these movements, we have our ways of measuring movements, we know what certain metrics mean, we know what correlations to look for, we know what kind of frequency bands of movement frequencies to look at. We then have some tools that we can use to capture something essential even in this more open-ended setup. And typically what happens in contact improvisation is that you have a stage-by-stage progression in what you do. So just to make sure that everyone is kind of drawn into and inducted into the phenomenon that people are studying during that class. Whether it's attention, or here it could be kind of interpersonal tuning. They are often done in stages. So starting from something which is very simple. So let's say that this kind of 4-person mirror game where one is leading and others are following could be stage 1, and then once people are happy doing that, they've done it in all the combinations, then you move into this emergent shared leadership. And then you open it up so that no longer you don't need to focus on the finger, you can do everything, you can do something else, you can play with your movement position in space, you can then play with other parts of your body and so on and so forth. However, if we have some kind of a measurement system in place, we can look at and analyze this data in detail as if it's a laboratory experiment, but hopefully then have something more interesting to say from the first-person perspective that we get from people. So this is basically the kind of idea behind these kinds of experiments. So that's all about mirroring. I'll quickly talk about social emotions, the other project that we did, and this is the one which has a little bit more music in it. So this is a 2-year project. We conducted with the aim of better learning to understand the emotional interaction between people, the expression, communication, and perception of emotions. And we had again a multidisciplinary team. So this is not with the Paris collaborators, but this is a Helsinki-based study. So we had three researchers, 2 choreographer dancers, and then we had Jussi Lampela, who's a composer and a really good. He's a very kind of front row arranger of ensemble music, mainly jazz, and then Ulla Lampela and Ida Laine, who are cellists. Or Ida is actually Sinivalo currently, so she got married and changed her name right at the end of the project. So 2 cellists and a composer were then invited in, like for the second year of the 2-year project, when we started to work on the end product, which was an artistic end product. So this is we wanted to study social emotions in contemporary dance, feeling that it's a good test bed for this, because it's often non-verbal, so we have to look at just emotional expression in the body. So I've been, for at least a decade, I've been really mesmerized by the skill that contemporary dancers have in expressing emotions and expressing social dynamics in the place without a single word, and often with very, very simple movement features. So because I have some friends who do that for a living, then I invited them for a project, and we did this. And so the first kind of design principle of this project, the first kind of main characteristic, is that we wanted to look at embodiment of emotion. So not so much the perception of it, or kind of, again, like not the psychology so much, but really focus on the embodiment, and not verbal, not anything else. The other thing that we wanted to have is this kind of communication of emotions, again as a kind of departure from traditional psychological approaches. And then finally, instead of having static emotional states, we wanted to see how emotions are, how contagious emotions are, and what happens when you catch someone else's emotion. Okay, so here's the project outline. So we first had started with artistic research. So basically Jarkko and Johanna, two dancer choreographers, they spent quite a lot of time in a dance studio going through a list of emotion words that we picked, and figuring out how they feel in the body, how they influence the way they move, and especially how they influence the way they move together. So if I have this emotion and I'm supposed to interact with you, how does that, what happens? How does that, if I hate you, if I love you, if I'm interested, if I'm aversive, if I'm disgusted, if I'm whatever, how does that feel in my body, and how does that influence my movement and my movement together with you? So they were using Stanislavski's method acting method. So basically finding a personal memory of a certain emotion, then listening where, and kind of figuring out how it's embodied, what changes does that memory do to their body, and then kind of basically turn it up to 11, as Jarkko mentioned, that they get this feeling of an emotion, and then they turn it up to really get an idea of how that goes. And once you then learn that, then you can bypass the personal memory and go straight from a cue of an emotion to this feeling that you have. They gave us or prepared for us a short loop of movement, a short choreography of about 20 seconds that they could loop to make it into a longer thing. And they suggested that they could do a neutral movement, as much as any movement can be neutral. But anyway, as such neutral movement that they could then perform under different emotional states or different emotional qualities, let's say. We ended up picking loving, and we ended up picking loathing as the other option. So love and hate if we think about the kind of arousal valence coordinate system, then the loving here is the positive and very active type of emotion, and the hating is the negative and very passive one. So it's more loathing maybe, or kind of, so it's not kind of an aggressive anger, angrily hating the other person. So it's not the arousal level is low in this case. And we had small stories that kind of describe this better than just this one word, but for the performance, for the purposes of this presentation, this love and hate are, we can use those. So they came into our studio. We did motion capture under different emotions, moving from hate to love, love to hate, neutral to love, and in all kinds of combinations. They were all dyadic dances, so they both had the same choreography, and they were dancing together. And so one dancer could be loving, the other one could be hating, one could be neutral, the other one could be first hating but then moving towards love during these loops, etc. So all the possible combinations. We then did kinematic analysis for these to figure out what kinematic features of movement are associated with which emotions. We then also conducted movement synthesis using these kinematic features that characterize each of our emotions. We can then make movement synthesis, take neutral movement and morph it to be, let's say, 120% loving rather than just 100, etc. And finally, to kind of validate our data set a little bit, we did a perceptual experiment, but perhaps I won't be talking about it now to save some time. In the end, we produced a dance performance using what we learned in this experiment, not using the same movement at all, using fresh movement and then freshly composed music as well, and I can show you that something about that project later. So here are some pictures from our process. So Jarkko and Johanna came to the studio. We did motion captures, starting with T-poses and then capturing their movements. And here I can show you one loop of the movement. Here, green guy is Jarkko. He's got the loving feeling, and then Johanna has the hating or loathing feeling in this example. And you can see basically the movements, the choreography that they do, the movements that they both do are the same. However, when you do it in a loving feeling, it's much faster, it's much bigger, it's much more elated, it's much more open. Whereas when you do it in the loathing, then you are much more crouched, slower, less expressive, and all those kinds of things. Let's watch it again. So this is our one loop of the data. And you can see that here a couple of design features. One is that they don't touch each other. The other one is that the loop for the green person ends with this kind of almost a T-pose type of movement, and this is basically a holding pattern. So they would wait and do this until the other person finishes their loop, and then they start the next loop together. So this is a way of kind of synchronizing. Making sure that if they would be doing 7 loops of happy and the other, or 7 loops of love, and the other one is doing 7 loops of hate, they would end up, the first one would be, the loving person would be done half a minute before the other one, and that would be problematic for many things. So the reason we did it this way was that then we can take these loops, individual loops, and we can use them in a perceptual experiment if we want to, and we did one little study. And because they are not touching each other, it's very easy, trivially easy for us to also manipulate this data. So we can very easily take, let's say, Jarkko here, and then swap Johanna's performance from this. From this performance, we can swap another Johanna. So we can take something that Johanna did in a different take. Maybe they were doing a loving thing or maybe neutral thing, and we can kind of, in that way, without even having to do any movement synthesis, we can create new stimuli, and this is one thing that we ended up doing. So here some velocity traces. So the movement traces show show the trajectories of movements and how thick the traces is indicating the velocity of the movement. And so on the top row we have this loving performances, and on the bottom row the loading ones. And you can quite clearly see that they are very different. You could say maybe trivially different, but it's now we have numbers on this. And so if we take not just the velocities, but we take in total of 300 different kinematic features from this. So all the different position, all the different markers in the capture, and take all their velocities and stuff. Are we out of time? Okay, let me get back to here. Yes. Yes, I can. Oh, sorry. Okay, can you hear me now? Yes. 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 I can see your, yeah, I can see the image of the group here. So yes, that's perfect. Cool. Okay, I'll move that microphone. I'll keep it so I can hear you from there, so you can start yelling at me if I go over. So basically, what we did next was to take all these kinematic features, a long list of them, and put them into a principal component analysis to basically see what comes out. And here's the projection for two components. So here the first component, to quickly explain what's here, and we are quite happy with this picture. So the first principal component, if we are looking at what kinematic features are loading it, is basically velocity and acceleration stuff. So faster movements are on this side, and slower movements are on this side. And then the color codings here are basically the red colors or reddish colors are the loving performances, and then the bluish colors are the loading performances. So that's quite nicely kind of separates, this first principal component separates the emotional designation. So that's you know, as expected basically, but it's quite nice to have it. The second principal component is more or less the similarity of the different markers. So basically how similar the two dancers are, and this is basically a symmetrical kind of a you can take this as being symmetrical around the zero, in a sense that in the around zero are the performances where both are doing the same emotion, and then when one is doing something completely different from the other, depending on whether it's participant 1 or participant 2 in this case, it's either positive or negative. So if we are tracing, let's say this magenta line here, what we have here is the 7 loops of participants performing, so that they first start both in the loving condition, both in the loving state, and then one of them is keeping there and the other one is shifting towards neutral. And so their difference kind of grows as they go, and also the average in the dyad, basically average speed in the dyad kind of also goes toward the mean of everything. So first principal component is the emotion, the second one is the social component, so how similar or different they are. And my interpretation of this picture, as it's quite nice and symmetrical, is basically that we had two very highly qualified professional dancers, as they were able to do these kind of step-by-step modifications to the level of the emotional performance in each emotion in such a nice and linear fashion. So what we did after this is we collected together the characteristics or the characterizations of these emotions into this matrix. So this the artistic research that Jarkko and Johanna did is basically just one part of the sort of matrix that they collected in the very beginning of the project, and then we compared this matrix with some other data, some previous research that had been carried out in using very different methods. So one of them is the kind of just asking thousands of people where in the body do they feel a certain emotion. This is something you've probably seen. I somehow have dropped that slide from the presentation, but you have seen these heat maps of bodies where this is Lauri Nummenmaa and others study, where they are literally thousands of people were pointing or coloring these mannequins online, indicating where they have higher or lower activity and activation in their body when they are feeling sad or happy and etc. And if we then take what Jarkko and Johanna were describing and we take what these participants were saying, we can see very nice correspondence. And there's also another study, a review paper on bodily expression of emotions, making a similar kind of a matrix of kinematics and different emotions. And again, that's a very good match. So that's kind of a triangulation of and again a testament to their the validity of their work. So in addition, we have music and projections here. So I guess I should talk about those a little bit. So now it's maybe time to try if my video works, and I'll try to play it from here and see how that works. You hopefully hear also some sound from this. So this is a trailer of our artistic outcome. Okay, so this was a dance piece that we then prepared, and we have performed this 2 times in Helsinki and once in Oulu. And this is half improvised, half composed piece where Jarkko and Johanna were making these movement loops, similar to what you saw in the motion capture part, but purpose made for this piece. Then Jussi composed music, again loops for two cellos. And then the rehearse period was basically both Jarkko and Johanna and then Ulla and Ida to learn how to perform these loops in different emotions, how to move from one emotion to another unpredictably and basically just by improvisation, following each other's leads. We were using verbal prompting of emotions. So basically in the rehearsals I was shouting emotions. And the logic of the piece is that one cellist and one dancer is a unit. So we have two units, each has a dancer and a musician. And then we give certain emotions. Let's say that the unit 1 gets happy, and then the unit 2 gets sad. And then from there, they start moving, they start playing. They can pick freely which loops they want to play, what movement loops they want to use, how long they are, how whatever. So there's a lot of left to improvisation. In the actual piece, we actually gave the choice of these emotions and emotion words to the audience. So there was a mobile vote where they voted emotions for Unit A and Unit B a few times during the course of a 20-minute performance. And that was basically, we were hoping that this would give the audience a little bit more of an insider view, or kind of an insider role in these interactions, and maybe make it easier for them to follow what's going on by being in a driver's seat, in a sense. And so movements, what we find out, like the main conclusion of this project, number one is that the concept of emotional state is, in my opinion, in question. Emotion, both the feeling and the expression especially, is constantly in flux, and it's something that, especially if you have a strong emotion, it basically the quality of the emotion comes from contrast to something. It's not kind of a self-standing thing. So it's all dynamics, and once you bring in an interactive quality, or kind of open up interaction into or allow interaction, you get a very dynamic situation indeed. And in this performance, especially having 4 people, 2 with the means of music and 2 with their means of movement, we got some very interesting processes. And it's all, every performance, every rehearsal, every time you start doing this, everything is unique. So it's very exciting. And from the feedback from audiences, we were doing something right, because everyone was really thrilled about this type of performance, where we bring in the audience to be part of the performance, and also give them a kind of first row seat into the artistic process of expressing and communicating emotions. Okay, now it's 10 past, so it's time for me to thank all my collaborators and supervisors and instructors and advisors and everything, and then we can then continue with questions. Thank you. Okay. Should I stop the stream, and is that